He drove into light traffic on Lambeth Palace Road and headed south. Alice was in the seat alongside him, distracting, honey-coloured legs disappearing into the other footwell. When it comes to cars, he was self-indulgent, justifying his current one by having no mortgage, bless you Auntie May, and as a compensatory indulgence for the ridiculous working hours and negligible social life every hospital doctor suffers. So those classy legs were disappearing into the classy footwell of a Mercedes 280 SL, a two-seater from the late 60s, and he hadn't got around to taking off its hardtop, as summer wasn't quite with them yet, so they were cosily cocooned under its pagoda-styled roof. South London drifted quietly by, miraculously free of traffic. They were both silent. Alice was furious with herself for fainting, though she'd recovered rapidly. Almost as soon as she was lying on the ground, she'd started to come round. "I don't faint," she'd pronounced, and within minutes had taken herself to the loo to splash her face with cold water. When she returned, she looked fully recovered. Simon had offered to give her a lift back, an offer she had quietly accepted, and which had earned him a leer from Adrian behind her back. Neither of them spoke for a while. Simon broke the silence first. "I could drop you off at your home now and collect you tomorrow morning on my way to Hampton Court if you like. It would save you a journey. If that is where you need to be tomorrow morning, you are virtually on my route." Alice glanced sideways at him shyly. "That would be kind, thank you. You're sure it's no trouble?" "It would be my pleasure." The silence resumed while Simon tried to think of a way of dissuading her from joining a vigil without offending or patronizing her. As if she had read his mind, she suddenly shifted in her seat so that she could look straight at him. He tried to concentrate on the road and not on the extra flash of thigh as she moved. "Simon, you will still let me join a vigil, won't you? I know I fainted, but I don't faint, really I don't. I don't understand why I did. I am worried about it, not about you fainting, that can happen to anyone, for a variety of reasons. But I am worried about exposing you to risk. What we have recorded is outside my knowledge, beyond my experience and out of my control. That puts us all at risk if we continue to investigate whatever it is. Adrian and I will go on. We have a royal command to fulfill, but you needn't expose yourself to anything that might happen." He could feel her mutiny. He negotiated a complicated junction. The thing is, I would like to be there when you confront whatever this is, and Sir Edmund would like me to be there too." She said this with a stubborn tone. "Who's talking about confronting? I am just going to go on investigating. We'll just record whatever turns up." "Whatever turns up" had been Adrian's phrase when they had discussed it. "Well, it may turn up to confront you and Adrian." "Why would it do that?" "I don't know," she sounded evasive, "but I think you're investigating something truly evil." "Well, that's even more reason for me to keep you out of it, isn't it?" A taxi jammed its brakes on, and the driver leant on its horn angrily. Simon had prevented it joining his stream of traffic by ignoring it. He really hadn't taken it in. Must concentrate. "Truly, I believe I can help you. And what's this about Sir Edmund wanting you to join a vigil?" "He wants me to take an active role in the investigation. He seemed unusually insistent." Simon was about to reply when a blue light started flashing behind him and a horn blared briefly. He looked at his rear-view mirror to see a traffic cop gesticulating for him to pull over. Shit! He found a space as soon as he could and pulled into the curb. Usually he got out of the car straight away under these circumstances. He'd always been told that's what you did. Confront them on level terms psychologically. Stand up eye to eye, proving you are alert and in possession of your faculties, etc. But Captain Jobsworth was so keen he beat him to it, probably because Simon was still thinking about confronting evil and shielding Alice from it, and why Pemberley was so keen Alice became involved. He lowered the side window just as the policeman was about to rap on it. "Good evening, sir," the policeman said in the irritatingly condescending manner, and with the sarcastic emphasis on the "sir" adopted by officious people who consider themselves to be in the right and you to be otherwise. He leant right into the car, no doubt sniffing for alcohol. He gave Alice in the passenger seat a stare, which veered into rudeness by being a fraction too long. "Just pulled you over for a friendly word." He didn't look or sound the slightest bit friendly. "Been following you for a while, and if you don't mind me saying so, you don't really seem to be driving with due care and attention, sir." Simon felt irrationally guilty, even though he couldn't recall having committed any offence. He tried to recall what he might have done wrong. He hadn't jumped a light, he hadn't been speeding. That taxi driver had been angry, but he just hadn't seen him in time, and it wasn't his right of way anyway. He hadn't been concentrating, that was all. "You mean the taxi? I didn't see him in time, it wasn't his right of way." "No, it wasn't his right of way, but it's courteous to allow a vehicle to join your flow of traffic. Otherwise it obstructs traffic heading the other way." Simon felt resentful, but kept his temper. If this idiot was going to be this pernickety, agreeing and apologizing would be the best course. "Well, I'm very sorry, officer, but I just did not see the taxi in time to let it in safely." "Exactly, sir. Got your driving license?" Simon handed it over. The police officer examined it and handed it back. "What sort of doctor?" Simon explained. The tone became slightly less hectoring, more avuncular. "Okay, sir, just a bit of friendly advice on this occasion. I could see you were chatting with your companion, and I'm sure she is, how shall I put this, clearly very, distracting. But it's important that you concentrate on driving when you're driving for the safety of others as well as your own." He stood upright and patted the car roof. "Nice car. Drive it safely. Carry on, Doctor, but with a little more care." Simon pressed the button which raised the side window and watched until it was closed. He watched the retreating figure of Jobsworth in his rear-view mirror carefully until he was safely back in his patrol vehicle, and then, with exaggerated care, rejoined the westbound stream of traffic. He felt angry and humiliated. He hadn't even done anything wrong. How dare that bastard humiliate him in front of Alice? And why refer to Alice at all? She was nothing to do with it. And how dare he pass comment on her? Very distracting indeed. Who did he think he was? He drove with fierce concentration. What's more, it made that bastard the second person who'd described Alice as very distracting in one day. And that had been another cheeky bastard. He glanced at Alice and was astonished to see her shoulders shaking with suppressed laughter. "What's so funny?" He was indignant. She looked at him with tears of laughter running down her cheeks. Your face, and you've got steam coming out of your ears." "Well, what do you think that was about? Bloody little Hitler. I wasn't even doing anything wrong. I think he just wanted to eye you up." She stopped chuckling, and her tone became solemn. "I'm sorry. I was distracting you, pleading to be allowed to join a vigil. I understand your reluctance, but please trust me, I think I can help. You weren't distracting me." "Okay, good. And you'll let me join a vigil?" "I'm thinking about it." He drove in silence for a while. They were getting close to her flat. "Look, do you fancy a walk?" he said. "I do. I want to clear my head." We can nip across the river to Bishop's Park. Not too manicured, and plenty of space." She gave him a shy, sideways glance. "I would enjoy that." He parked in the small gravelled car park next to Fulham Palace. He turned towards her, and she to him. Her green eyes looked enormous. "Okay, you are the newest member of the St. Thomas's Hospital's Ghost Investigation Team," he said. She leant across suddenly and kissed him on the cheek. "Thank you," she said. He got out and went round to hold open the heavy door for her. As she moved to get out, his chivalry was rewarded, courtesy of the low seating position, with a view right up her short skirt, along silky-looking inner thighs, to a triangle of semi-transparent white cotton. "You are a true gentleman," she said, her eyes twinkling. "Madam, would you give me the pleasure of walking with me?" "Dr. Carlyle, are you suggesting a stroll in the park?" Her expression was mock shock. "Indeed I am," he said. They strolled companionably along the avenue which ran beside the river. It was quiet, with few people in the park, a balmy, warm evening with little breeze. They passed the area of flower beds and the walled garden, and the parkland opened out into a large area of grass and woodland which had run wild. The run-down palace buildings lay beyond. "Do you know anything about Fulham Palace?" Simon asked. "A little. It was the residence of the bishops of London from the 1100s until recently. The buildings, not unlike Hampton Court, are a mix of all the intervening centuries. Parts of 14th century, but it isn't in my remit, as it isn't Crown property. It's still owned by the Church of England. It had the longest moat in England. If we carry on walking in this direction, we'll come to it. Now it's just a dry ditch." She led them into the woodland until they found themselves in a leafy hollow. It was cool and dark, and they were alone. "See?" she said, smiling at him. Simon felt suddenly as if time had stopped. "Alice?" He couldn't get the words out. She stood very still, looking at him. Her gaze was solemn, calm, and knowing. He had never felt like this. He could feel his heart going like a train. "Yes?" "Alice, I just wondered, Oh, sod it, come here." And he reached out for her. She came. Bad, bad girl. He had said, "Come here," and she had, just like that. It, or rather he, had been irresistible. She looked at her face in the mirror. She looked like a stranger. Her lips looked as if they'd been kissing forever, still plumply swollen, plum-coloured, almost bruised. Her eyes were heavy-lidded and misty with satiety, and she looked dishevelled. "As well you might, lady," she said aloud to her reflection. "'Tis graceful." She brushed her teeth and went downstairs. It was funny, but she felt all sorts of clashing emotions. Guilt. She didn't think Sir Edmund had this in mind when he suggested she get involved. And gratitude. What was that about? It had happened so suddenly and unexpectedly that she had had no time to explain her situation to Simon. She didn't think it would have made any difference. It hadn't for her, but still. However, clashing with guilt and winning easily, she felt an extraordinary sense of elation. She felt happy, carefree, like a teenager again. The elation was linked to a feeling of fulfillment. Fulfillment? So you should, she thought. You behaved like a rabbit. You just wanted to waft around until he came back. For what? For more? He was so funny and cute. And, she thought, he'd very nearly kissed her before, early on when she'd lowered her head close to his. to interpret that Elizabethan scribble. She'd been naughty then, too. She'd pressed her breast into his shoulder quite purposely, and she had no idea she was going to do it until it happened. When he did kiss her, she was lost immediately. He'd been so gentle, so shy, well, shy-ish, and thoughtful, and, oh Christ, well, just a million miles from what she'd had to endure from her ex, who didn't think he was an ex because he wouldn't recognize the divorce, and who had persisted in trying to get to her, despite restraining orders, until she had run. She shuddered as she remembered the last time she'd seen her husband. He had let himself into her new flat with a key she didn't know he possessed, and attacked her in her kitchen. She only had time to spin round before he was on her, pinioning her against the work surface. He was roaring drunk. He yelled into her face with stinking breath, "You fucking bitch, I'm gonna fuck you right now. Your face, legs, tits and ass cry out for it. Everybody wants to fuck you, but you won't do it with me, will you, you stuck-up cow? Well, you're getting it whether you like it or not." She knew better than to respond. It just inflamed him more, but it hadn't saved her. He punched her very hard in the solar plexus, too sly to ruin her face. And, while she gasped for air, he tore at her blouse and bra until he had exposed her breasts, hiked her skirt up above her hips, and tore at her knickers with such ferocity that he lifted her off the ground, spread-eagling her back onto the worktop with her head lodged against the wall, and jammed himself between her thighs. He was wrestling with his trouser flies with one hand, the other round her throat when she stabbed him. She had flailed her arms around on the worktop, and her hand had fallen on the handle of a kitchen knife. She picked it up and stuck it in his side as hard as she could. It was a long-bladed bread knife with a serrated edge, and it had gone in below his ribs deeply. Sort of sawed its way in. She saw the incredulity in his eyes before he released her and leapt back with a roar of pain. Then he had staggered out. He'd lurched out of the kitchen, clutching his side, still roaring. She hadn't noticed much blood. She heard the outside door slam shut. Then she heard the shriek of a car's wheels as he left. She sat on the worktop, shaking uncontrollably, unable to move. Some while later, when she felt able to, she went to her bedroom to find a top to cover herself, looked through a front window to make certain he had gone. Then she phoned the police. They had found him in the car in a ditch, unconscious but alive. The hospital staff had been more concerned by the level of alcohol in his blood than the knife wound to his side. The knife wound could have killed him, apparently, but the alcohol definitely should have. She had moved again, telling nobody except her parents her whereabouts, but somehow he had found her. Then began a game of cat and mouse, in which she moved and he found her. He subjected her to a period of stalking, following her, sometimes just silently lurking, at other times yelling abuse outside her latest flat. The police removed him. A restraining order was instituted, which he consistently ignored. So she moved again, and the whole cycle was repeated. And then one night, he had attempted to batter down her front door. He was beside himself with rage, too pissed to be coherent, and she knew it was hopeless. Then he shot the front window out. The noise of the shotgun was enormous. Lots of neighbors' lights went on. He was restrained, still in her sitting room, trying to demolish it. So, after the police had arrested him yet again, she waited until the police van had left, packed a small suitcase, and ran. Away from him, away from her home, away from her parents, and from the country she'd lived in for 16 years, to London, where anybody can hide if they want to. This was her dark past, what she hadn't had time to explain to Simon. Would she ever be able to tell Simon? She wasn't sure. The doorbell rang, disturbing her bleak train of thought. Some daydream. She was still in her dressing gown. She peeped through the window. Simon with some packages. She let him in with a broad smile and turned to go upstairs. But he dropped the packages and wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulling her back against him. "Hello, is someone a little slow this morning?" He untied her gown cord, flicked open the gown and cupped her breasts. Her nipples became instantly erect. He cuddled her. That didn't take long, did it? She could feel him between her buttocks. "And you're not far behind, Dr. Carlyle. What can you be thinking of?" "By the feel of it, much the same as you." A little while later, he propped himself up on his elbow and traced a line along her nose with his finger. "Thank you," he said. "What for?" "You know what for. By the way, I love your nose. It is one of your most endearing secondary sexual characteristics." "What are you talking about?" "Your nose, the way it wrinkles, makes me want to kiss it." And he did. "Secondary sexual characteristic doesn't sound very sexy." "Oh, but it is." He suddenly sprang out of bed. "I forgot the packages. I bought us lunch." He cascaded down the stairs, stark naked, and clattered back up. He stood in the doorway with a package. "Do you like mussels? I saw them on the fishmonger's slab, a big glistening mound. I just had to buy them." "Oh," she tried not to disappoint. "I'm sorry. I can't eat mussels. I'm allergic to them." "Oh," he acted crestfallen. "What do they do to you?" "You don't want to know, and that's quite enough interrogation, thank you." "Oh well, that's that then. We'll have to put them back." "What?" "We'll have to put them back," he said more slowly. "On the fishmonger's slab?" "No, in the sea." So they did. After a mad journey in his beautiful car, which made light work of the miles down the A30 to Salisbury, and then the fast Roman road to Blandford Forum, and on to the Purbecks. He parked at Kimmeridge, leapt from the car, grabbed the bag of mussels on their ice in one hand, held her hand in the other, and led her down to the shore. He led her to the right, to the spurs of stone at the western edge of the bay, where they ran out into the sea, left glistening and slippery by the falling tide. "This is the best place for rock pools," he explained. "I know, I remember," she said. They stood solemnly as he poured the mussels into a submerged crevice at the edge of a very large and deep pool. He looked at her and grinned. "The best thing to do, don't you think? They can live to tell an outrageous tale. What an adventure they've had. They'll be able to tell their mussel grandchildren all about it in years to come. They'll be the most celebrated mussels in the whole of musseldom." She laughed with him, her eyes wet with joyful tears. So this is what it's like. This is love, she supposed with wonder. This madness. They were not comfortable. The three of them were huddled behind the monitor screens in the corner of the gallery, and each had expressed disquiet. There was an atmosphere. To Simon it felt as if there was something in that wretched corridor with them that night, and that it was anticipating an event. It was Alice's first vigil, so perhaps it was just his nascent atavistic protective fear for a mate that they were picking up on. Then there was a flash of lightning somewhere in the distance to the west, visible through the windows of the gallery, and, after an interval, a loud rumble of thunder. "Great, just what we don't need." The tension in Adrian's voice was evident. "Where are those batteries?" "They're under this table somewhere," Simon said. "Do you think we're in for a power cut?" He ducked his head beneath the table, which brought him right up against the outside of someone's silky thigh. She didn't move it away. A wonderful erotic image flashed through his mind. "Here they are," He slid the batteries sideways towards Adrian. "Dunno about a power cut," Adrian said. "Just feels strange, that's all. Anyway, we got 'em for something like this, so we might as well use them." He started fiddling with leads, and Simon sat back in his seat next to Alice. Try as he might, he was finding it hard to concentrate tonight. He didn't like the atmosphere at all, but he couldn't stop thinking about sex. Those thighs. On their outer sides erotic enough, but inside? "Bloody hell," said Adrian, as a thunderclap crescendoed through the building. A fraction after, a bright flash of lightning. "That's quite close enough, thank you." The thunder rumbled on for a while and was still audible, when another flash of lightning lit up all the windows of the gallery, casting the whole place in lurid, flickering white. The thunder was simultaneous, violent enough to shake the building. The electricity cut out, monitors crashed, and they were left in a silent black vacuum, with the din still echoing in the large spaces of the great hall and great watching chamber, and a smell like cordite in the air. Adrian scrabbled around with a torch, then the monitors came back to life, and they could see the gallery on the screens and themselves in the reflected light. Good, or at least they are working. How long will they give us? Plenty of time, at least 8 hours. That's okay then. His mind drifted back to earlier in the day. Adrian's voice cut across his reverie. Temperature dropping like a stone. Simon couldn't feel the drop in temperature, but given his thoughts, he was probably on fire. He could smell something like fire, but not quite. The smell of cordite was suddenly there again, strongly. No, not quite cordite, and he remembered where he'd smelt it before. Walking around the ash rim of the volcano Irazu in Costa Rica, 10 years after it had erupted and destroyed the old capital, Carthago. Peering into the unnatural green sulphurous lake hundreds of feet below them, which was its now quiescent center, each footstep sending up a small cloud of black ash. There had been a smell just like this. An acrid blend of sulphur, cinder, and ash. It was there for a moment only, to be replaced by another strange smell which grew rapidly in intensity. A blend of herbs and wild flowers competing with a strong smell of open drains. "Temperature's going through the floor," muttered Adrian. They both studied the screen. "Look," said Alice. They looked up. There was no need for monitors. The gallery was lit with flickering light from naked flames in sconces, at intervals along the walls. The walls themselves appeared different, painted in bright primary colors of blue and red, edged with gold, hung with rich tapestries, and the ceiling was gold, glinting in the light from the torches. The floorboards were strewn with rushes and dried flowers and herbs. The William and Mary doors at the end of the gallery had disappeared. Instead, there was an ornate, arched Tudor door in its place. The door burst open, and there was the familiar figure of a young woman, a visible, buxom figure running towards them. Feet swooshing through the rushes, nightgown gaping open at the front, revealing full young breasts, and its long skirt flapping round her legs, threatening to trip her. Hair loose, tumbling down her back as far as her waist, mouth open wide. The air was torn with the sound of an unnaturally loud wail of despair, which ended abruptly in a screech as she reached the door to Henry's defunct pew and began pulling at the door and hammering frantically at it. The sounds of her knocks were like a hammer on an anvil. There was a commotion at the entrance to the other limb of the gallery, and yeoman guardsmen spilled in from the great watching chamber. Some armed with weapons Simon knew were halberds. The young woman shrieked and tried to escape, but the guards were on her in seconds, passing their observation point to reach her. One grabbed at her gown as she tried to flee, tearing it from her, but she was clearly beyond caring and writhed and wrestled with her attackers, stark naked. She screamed Henry's name out loud until suddenly she was silenced by a hard blow to the midriff with the blunt end of the shaft of a halberd, which sucked the wind from her, and then she was struck viciously over the head with another, which felled her. Her supine body was grabbed, a soldier at each limb, and she was unceremoniously carted from the gallery back towards the apartments, limbs spread-eagled, sex casually exposed, head lolling, hair dragging in the rushes, with as little care as if they were carrying some carcass. The scene began to fade and then was gone, to be replaced by an uneasy silence. Simon felt the presence of something or somebody still there. He looked at the others, whose faces, like his, were visible in the reflected light from the monitors. Both registered blank shock. He was sure his face wore the same expression. His jaw ached as if he'd had his teeth gritted the whole time. "Did we catch all that?" he asked Adrian. "Dunno, but we all saw it, yeah? So I guess the monitors did too. Told you she was a real blonde." As usual, Adrian used levity as a cover for his unease. "Hang around. Something's still going on. Temperature's going berserk. Dropping further. It's going to be like a bloody deep freeze in a minute." Simon could feel it, and there was a reddish hue to the darkness, down by the great watching chamber, a blood-red tint which was deepening. He felt an acute sense of dread, and a feeling of terrible malice filled the gallery. The whole place seemed to crackle with it. "There's something else in here with us, down at the great watching chamber end. Can you feel it?" "Yeah," Adrian said, "and the thermal imager has it as a bloody great black area. That's colder than cold." Alice moaned quietly and shifted in her seat. "You all right?" Simon whispered to her. She didn't reply, but he could feel her trembling. He held her hand, and she clutched his so hard it hurt. The feeling of malice deepened beyond discomfort. "Bloody hell, Doc, something is in here with us, and whatever it is, I don't like it. Get rid of it now." "Of course, Adrian. Anything you say, Adrian. How do you suggest I do it?" "Dunno. Cast a spell at it, incant at it in Latin, tell it to fuck off in Godspeak." Alice began to shake violently, and she seemed unaware of either Simon or Adrian. She stared with a terrified expression down the gallery towards where the malevolent seemed to be focused. Her teeth chattered. She went completely white. She muttered something in a questioning tone, almost under her breath. Simon couldn't quite catch what she was saying because of her chattering teeth, but it sounded like a name. Johannes, or Johanna, possibly. Her tone, one of shocked incredulity. But Simon couldn't reach her. She wasn't unconscious, but as if in a trance. The atmosphere of malice didn't last long. It started to fade, along with the sulphurous cordite smell. But it left behind a total and eerie silence. "I think it left of its own accord," Simon said. "Yeah, good," Adrian said. Alice came out of her trance, looking and sounding bewildered and disorientated. She replied calmly enough that she was fine, to Simon's concerned inquiry, but she could neither tell them what she had seen nor what she had felt at the heart of the malignant entity at the end of the gallery. "What do we do now, Doc?" "A good question. I think a discreet withdrawal might be best. I don't relish spending any more time with whatever that was tonight, should it choose to return, and I don't want Alice exposed to it any more either. I think we should go back and see what the tapes have recorded of that little show, because it would be a clincher if they recorded all that. And if it's possible, let's take all of them." Nobody objected to this plan. They left, sticking close together, via the great watching chamber, down the staircase in the horn room, to the kitchens below and out into Fish Yard. God, that felt horrible, Doc, didn't it? It's like someone was watching us all the way. Yeah, especially in the great watching chamber. I felt that whatever was in that room didn't go away. It just removed itself from our ambit. Simon hadn't felt guilty or cowardly for leaving. Alice remained silent, passive, and withdrawn. Simon gave her a reassuring hug in the dark when Adrian was packing the tapes in his van. She'd hugged him back. "Right, we'll need to take 2 cars. I'll take Alice with me, Adrian. See you there?" "Sure, Doc. Take it steady, no rush. It'll take me a while to set him all up." Simon drove slowly, asking Alice questions, trying to assess how she really was. She seemed calm enough, but too withdrawn for Simon's liking, and she still could not recall what had terrified her. Simon's concerns were in no way ameliorated by what appeared on the tapes. He had known as soon as they entered the lab from the thunderous look on Adrian's face. Every single videotape was a snowstorm of visual whiteout and loud hissing static. Nothing, not a sodding thing on any of them. Then they looked at the thermal imaging tapes. A kaleidoscopic display, a rainbow of coloured images, the figure of the young queen, her outline defined in dark blues and purples. At the other end, what he thought of as the evil end, was an impenetrable, dense blackness. She had no way of explaining what she had seen in that dark, malicious space at the entrance to the great watching chamber. Looking back down the gallery, she still couldn't quite believe what she had seen. How could it, she thought of the evil focus as it, have known of her link with him? What was he doing there? He was serving a life sentence for murder in South Africa. He wasn't swanning around Hampton Court Palace at the dead of night. And what about the shadow? How could she possibly explain that? She couldn't, so she wasn't going to try. She had clammed up, as her mother used to say. She presented a calm demeanour by just shutting down. Simon had picked up on that straight away. How she felt inside was very different. She could see Simon's professional concern, recognizing her behaviour, sensing her turmoil, but her whole being was crying out because she sensed more keenly his hurt at being excluded. In a new, brand new lover, this was rejection. Not loved enough, not trusted enough to know innermost secrets. She felt torn. Love is all about trust, but she dare not let him in on those secrets yet, lest she lose him. They were too shocking. So she remained silent, while the questions went on in her head, round and round, until she thought she would scream. Simon dropped her off at her front door. Was it her imagination? Did she imagine the coolness with which he suggested she have a quiet night and a good rest? In her turmoil, she felt angry at his patronizing tone, until she remembered his profession. He was just in doctor mode. He had a few errands to make, and then he was going to go home to think about what to do next. Be in touch in the morning. Her heart had lurched at his rejection, but he had said that if she felt unwell, or troubled, or needed him, to get in touch, whatever the hour. So it wasn't that bad, was it? Oh, wasn't it? She had been pacing the floor downstairs, thinking her endless circular thoughts which led nowhere, when the telephone rang. She rushed to it, hoping to hear Simon's voice. Her disappointment was swamped by fear when she heard the clipped tone of her adopted country, the country from which she had fled and with which she had hoped never to have any further contact. It was the prison authority in South Africa. Her husband had escaped. His whereabouts were unknown. She leant against the wall to stop herself falling over. There was an international alert out for his immediate rearrest. The voice was sure she was aware that he had become psychotic during his term of imprisonment and was considered extremely dangerous. Become psychotic? Become psychotic? What the hell sort of state did they think he was in when he murdered her parents? The voice reassured her that they were doing everything in their power to apprehend him, and they thought it was only a matter of time before they rearrested him. Flights to the UK from South Africa were being monitored even more closely than usual, so... In the meantime, no cause for alarm, but if there was any hint of contact, she was to inform the appropriate authority immediately. Any hint of contact, if he found her, the first hint of contact would be, at the very least, his fist in her face, and that would only be shortly before he blew her face off with a shotgun, as he had done to both her mother and father. She replaced the receiver and slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor with her knees drawn up to her chin. What did she do now? Run, rabbit, run, 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 run? He couldn't understand her. She was sobbing so much she was incoherent. 15 minutes after he had received her call, he screeched to a halt outside her front door, reversed at the same idiotic speed into the only available space further back down the street, and parked untidily. Jobsworth would have been less than impressed. She opened the door as he approached and collapsed into his arms, sobbing violently. He closed the door behind them with his foot and just stood holding her close until her crying lessened, by which time his shirt front was sodden. When the sobbing had eased to occasional hiccuping spasms, he picked her up and carried her upstairs to bed. They lay in almost total darkness, he on his back and she in the crook of his arm, with her head pillowed by his chest, and he listened as she told him, haltingly at first, and then with increasing loquacity as her indignation kicked in at the reliving her secrets. He said nothing as she spoke, just listened, increasingly appalled, as she outlined her life in South Africa. It should have been a success story. A hunky burr with a brain, a penchant for banking, and with a gambling streak, had been carving out a successful career as a stockbroker in Johannesburg when he met Alice. He had fallen in love with her and pursued her until she agreed to marry him. Simon felt a pang of guilt. He empathized with the man's obsession. She had been reluctant, she was very young, she didn't think she was in love, but she didn't know what being in love felt like. She was enjoying her university career, she was reading Tudor history as a post-grad. Instinct made her hesitate, but his persistence won. He ingratiated himself with her parents. Parental pressure finally toppled her, and she went against her instinct, something she could never forgive herself for now. Their marriage had been rocky, almost from the outset. No idyll in the sun, this. Simon listened to the familiar dismal story of incompatible people stuck in a deteriorating relationship. In this case, a catastrophic landslide of deterioration. Hidden from her until after they were married were facets of his nature which were unpleasant. He was a bullying control freak, childish if he didn't get his way, and vindictive when thwarted. He was petulant when she wouldn't give up university, but it was a reckless side to his nature which led him off track. Heavy drinking led to cannabis and cocaine abuse. His work went downhill as decisions he made became wilder and increasingly unsound. Which was chicken and which was egg, she didn't know. She had had no idea he was on drugs. She had tried cannabis once when she'd been drinking at a party, and it made her so squiffy, she said, she'd never touch it again. The first she knew of the drug problem, which he hadn't indulged in with her, was when he started hitting her. Apart from his outrage at anyone hitting her, the tale of the man's disintegrating personality was so bloody predictable that Simon felt increasingly angry as he listened. Burgeoning paranoia and jealousy at imagined infidelity had made him thump her about. She described his subtle abuse of her in the beginning, hitting her hard but not where bruises show, until he lost control of his temper. From then on, she would be kept in the house until the bruising faded after each unpredictable attack. Paranoia was the cardinal sign of both cannabis and cocaine overuse in susceptible people. Unfortunately, It was also the cardinal sign in acute paranoid schizophrenia. Unraveling the illness from the drug abuse was a problem, as the likely age of presentation was identical, and could one cause or exacerbate the other? Nobody had proved it for certain. Simon had been fighting a losing battle trying to alert his colleagues to the link between cannabis abuse and the onset of psychosis for a long time. Hippies and flower power was still extant, and a huge lobby of North American psychiatrists denied any such link with cannabis. And did it matter? The outcome was the same, a ponderous illness often with florid symptoms, which responded very slowly to treatment even when they could be persuaded or forced to take it, and in which the patient lacked any insight into their abnormal behavior. A buggered-up life, in other words. But very few remained vibrantly active and completely deranged. Alice's husband sounded like one of that very singular few, and Simon's blood ran cold as he listened to her speak so quietly and so factually about the events as they unfolded. He understood why she hadn't left him, not just the feeling that somehow it must be her fault. Their generation was the baby boom generation, the burgeoning of population to replace the carnage of the Second World War. To their parents, marriage was sacrosanct. Marriage was still for keeps now. You didn't split up, even if your marriage was a crap one. She had become distressed again as she tried to tell him the final gory details, how her parents died, and he'd shushed her, cuddled her, cajoled her to sleep, telling her he loved her, that he would look after her, and amazingly, she had gone to sleep, emotionally exhausted. He lay unmoving, flat on his back, staring up into the darkness, her soft, warm breath fanning his chest, and his thoughts were as bleak as an Arctic winter. Firstly, was she telling him the truth, this woman folded round him, one decorous long limb curled across his groin, her sex warm against his thigh, her breath teasing and caressing his chest? Instinctively, yes. Yes, he was in love with her, and yes, he had to obey that instinct. He loved her, so he trusted her. She hadn't wanted to tell him, well, not like this, anyway, but he could understand that. She had said, and he understood, how she had felt partly responsible, guilty and powerless in equal measure because she hadn't been able to stop him. She had felt inadequate, but much, much worse had been the overburdening guilt she felt. Guilt for having married him, guilt for having run away. It was all her fault, and her mother and father had been murdered as a direct result, she said. They'd been killed because they wouldn't divulge where she'd gone. They couldn't. She hadn't told them. She'd been going to, of course, later, when she'd felt safe from him. She hadn't told them before because she suspected that theirs was the source that had allowed him to keep finding her. Self-imposed guilt for the murder of your parents. How do you live with that? How do you remain normal, yourself? And what about him, this man to whom she had been married? He was apparently intellectually bright, had remained obsessed with Alice, was homicidal, was apparently more psychotic than before, and was on the run. Why he was on the run seemed rhetorical. Where would he be striving to get to? Equally so. The answer, Alice, in each case. Was he well enough to be able to track her down? That wasn't rhetorical. That was a straight question needing an answer and action. Well, Simon wasn't going to leave her alone from now on. He squirmed with guilt at his feelings earlier. He had felt hurt and sulked. He'd known she was hiding something from him, and had felt jealous and excluded. He hugged her gently and, still asleep, she wriggled more closely up against him. She awoke feeling calmer. The outpouring of emotion had been cathartic. Not surprising, really. She'd suppressed it so long. She was still snuggled into his chest, rocked soothingly by the gentle rise and fall of his breathing. She looked up at him through half-closed lashes. He was sleeping serenely. She studied his face with something approaching awe. How could this man be so different from any other man she'd met? At the other end of the spectrum, not just from Johannes, obviously, but her father always had an aloofness to him, unwilling or unable to express emotion. He had, for instance, never once told her that he loved her or her mother. She knew he did, he just couldn't say it. This man wore his heart on his sleeve. She had known straight away what his feelings had been for her, the very first time they'd seen each other. She'd seen the shock of recognition in his eyes, as if he'd been waiting for her all his life. She'd felt his eyes on her as she left the room, even with her back to him, and he'd been so sweetly diffident with her. He seemed completely oblivious to his own attractiveness. He had no idea that she felt the same shock of recognition. She continued to study him. Serene now and serene when awake, it defined his character, a calm, quiet strength, which she instinctively knew did not come from his medical training. That quiet strength he transmitted to her. He had said he loved her and would protect her, and she believed him. She felt strong and secure with him, a strength bigger than the sum of both of them. Could he protect her from Johannes? She knew suddenly and clearly he would die trying. He had listened so calmly to her as she outlined the sickening story, not judgmental at all. She had felt him weighing everything up. She had recognized the icy anger which built in him as she spoke, and knew that he believed her. She felt strong enough to tell him the other things too when he woke up. That she had an image of Johannes in that black thing in the gallery. Would he believe her? And would he believe it was a premonition? And what about the shadow formed by that sinister, headless figure? Would he believe that, or was it stretching credulity too far?